According to Apple, the new MacBook Pros are the fastest and most powerful laptops the tech giant has ever released. But are the new M1 Pro and M1 Max truly good gaming machines? Did Apple finally deliver MacBook Pros that are capable of running AAA games at decent speeds? Let's find out. This is Lloyd from Mac Gamer HQ, and today we're taking a look at the new 14-inch MacBook Pro powered by the newly introduced M1 Pro chip. We'll be benchmarking 10 games today, all of them running natively on macOS. Some are among the best looking AAA games available today, while others are complex games requiring fast processors. The machine we're running these tests on is the base 14-inch model that you can buy for $1,999. It comes with an 8-core CPU, 14-core GPU, 16GB of unified memory, and a 512GB SSD. The first game we'll test is Metro Exodus, arguably one of the best looking games available on macOS. Metro Exodus has great graphics, which means it has high system requirements. On top of that, the macOS version of the game doesn't support M1 chips natively yet, meaning this is the Intel version running through Rosetta 2. Don't know what Rosetta 2 is? Rosetta 2 is a translation process that enables an M1 Mac with Apple Silicon to use apps built for Intel-based Macs. Even though Metro Exodus hasn't been specifically optimised for M1 Macs, the M1 Pro manages to run it well. At high settings in 1200p, the game can run at over 40 frames per second. And if you're looking for a smoother experience, medium settings will give you an even better performance. Next up, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the latest Tomb Raider game from Square Enix and was ported to macOS by Feral Interactive. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is an impressive looking game, and it's great to see it run smoothly at 1200p resolution and medium settings on the M1 Pro chip. As with Metro Exodus, the game doesn't have an M1 native version, which means this is again an Intel game running through Rosetta 2. Still, Feral Interactive is one of the top Mac developers around, and all of their games are always well optimised, largely thanks to the use of the Metal API exclusive to Apple machines. MMORPG World of Warcraft was one of the first games to ever receive a native M1 version. But what does native mean? Unlike games that require Rosetta 2 to run on Macs with Apple Silicon, native games are coded to run on M1 Mac specifically, and should offer the best possible performance. As advertised by Apple, a native M1 game or app can offer much better performance than previously. In this case, World of Warcraft, which can be quite demanding in busy scenes with lots of players, runs beautifully on M1 Macs. The game is no slouch on Intel Macs, but as you can see here, M1 Macs, and especially the M1 Pro and M1 Max can run it at very high settings and resolution without a problem. Switching gears a bit, let's take a look at another classic. Counter-Strike Global Offensive may have been around for a few years, but it remains one of the most popular first-person shooters in the world. CSGO already ran pretty well on an M1 MacBook Air, but as expected, the M1 Pro can run it at higher settings and resolution, all while sticking to a solid frame rate. CSGO could definitely run much better if Valve gave its Mac version some love though. The game still runs on the outdated OpenGL API instead of using the much faster and more efficient Metal API, and as you probably guessed already, the game still doesn't have an M1 version. This is the Intel version of the game running through Rosetta 2. If you're looking for even more M1 benchmarks, be sure to check out our native M1 gaming benchmark page, which includes links to all of our benchmarks we've performed so far. You can find a link in the description below. The latest entry in the legendary Sid Meier's Civilization series, Civ 6 is not only one of the best turn-based strategy games out there, but it's also one of the best strategy games, period. We were lucky enough to get a same-day release for both the Mac and Windows versions of the game, but unfortunately the game wasn't all that well optimised for macOS back at launch. On Intel Macs, Civ 6 struggles due to a lack of Metal support and high CPU loads. Clearly, the use of the outdated OpenGL API is holding it back. Luckily, M1 Macs are much more powerful than Intel Macs. As you can see on screen, the M1 can handle Civ 6 just fine. As you can also see, the game runs much more smoothly even when matches are in their final stages and maps are chock full of units. Arguably the king of the MOBA genre, League of Legends is one of the most popular and competitive games you can play on a Mac. League of Legends has had its ups and downs on macOS. For a while it wasn't even playable when macOS Catalina was released. These days though it runs just fine, largely thanks to Metal API support. League of Legends runs well on M1 Macs too, even if it does still require Rosetta 2. When looking at its performance on M1 Pro though, the game runs even better. In that same vein, the other side of the MOBA coin, Dota 2, also runs great on the M1 Pro. Dota 2 was the first ever game on Mac to use the Vulkan API. That's made possible thanks to the Vulkan VK framework, which allows Vulkan games to use Metal to run on a Mac. When moving from OpenGL to Vulkan/Metal, the game saw huge performance improvements. Dota 2 may require Rosetta 2 to run on the M1 chip for now, but that really isn't a problem, given how well it performs. Minecraft, the indie game that eventually became one of the largest titles in gaming history, is considered a fairly easy and lightweight game to run. That's probably due to the blocky graphics and seemingly low-res style, but don't be fooled. Minecraft can be surprisingly difficult to run properly, especially when a lot of things have been built in one of its worlds. Our gameplay footage here doesn't do Minecraft justice. This is quite early on in a game with not a lot going on, but as you can see, Minecraft reliably hits max FPS on the M1 Pro. New king of city building games, Skylines has always been a challenging game to run on Mac, and most Intel Macs struggle to run it properly to this day. On an M1 Pro, the game certainly runs better though. In fact, it can achieve an acceptable frames per second at a relatively high resolution of 1200p. But, to be clear, in spite of supporting Metal, this game is still a challenge to run on macOS. Perhaps if Paradox ever decides to create a native M1 version, Skylines will finally be able to shine on M1 Macs. Finally, Dirt Rally is the last game we'll test today. Another excellent Mac port from Feral Interactive, Dirt Rally runs great on most modern Macs. As can be expected, even though it requires Rosetta 2 to run on our M1 Pro, the game just flies on our test machine, even at 1200p resolution and the highest settings. That said, the game is still 6 years old. So there you have it, our first go at M1 Pro benchmarks. We're sorry that the channel has been so quiet lately, but expect a ton of benchmarks and comparison videos in the near future. After all, we've bought these Macs, so it's time to push them to their limits. Next time we'll be comparing gaming on the M1 MacBook Air against the M1 MacBook Pro 14-inch, so be sure to subscribe for more.